Hey everyone, thanks for joining me in another video. I wanted to build on the prior video talking about planning and weather forecasting and apps, and I really love using a particular app called windy.com, and so I want to take you through a little bit more detail about the ACCESS-C model. It's now available in windy.com, and also talk about the different models that are available, or weather forecasting models that is, in that app, and how to make the best decision around which ones to use, how far out the shoot is, what's the most reliable information for me, and hopefully it can give you a bit of a process to follow when you're doing your own planning for shoots, or even other events. It doesn't have to be for photography as well, but I really like to be able to match the conditions to the kinds of shots that I'd really like to take. It's certainly very applicable if you're trying to do some astrophotography where you're wanting to make sure you have some beautiful clear skies, or if you're wanting to do a sunrise and have just the right amount of high cloud off the horizon for that beautiful sunrise color. So that's what we can do with our planning, and we really want to be in the most beautiful place at the most beautiful time of day in the most beautiful light, so we can just take these pictures that we've only ever dreamed of, and that's what I'm here to help you do. So let's get into it. Alright, so here we are in the windy.com app, and if you were to load the app for the first time, it would look something a bit like this. You can see Australia, New Zealand there. Obviously our focus is Australia tonight with some of the models we're talking about. The ACCESS models are from the Bureau of Meteorology, so unfortunately for the Kiwis amongst us, not going to be able to cover that aspect, and we can really see quite clearly the coverage that the ACCESS model has. In this case, I believe it does actually, the ACCESS-G model, as you can see here, that does cover New Zealand. However, the newer, or rather the more high resolution models, they're not new, they're just new to windy.com. They are only covering aspects of Australia. And so here we go, we've got AD, Adelaide, DN, Darwin, Perth, Victoria, Tasmania, Brisbane, North Queensland and Sydney are the regions, and if you click on them you can actually see the areas that are being covered as you're zoomed out. So that just makes it a bit clearer to find the one that is matching where you're at the moment. The other thing you can notice here is there are some areas of overlap in the models. If I switch to Victoria Tas, you can see that around the border there's a bit of overlap, and if we click from this one over to Sydney, you can see that Griffith and Canberra and those areas have a bit of overlap too. So you almost have two different forecasts to choose from. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's a bad thing. It's probably better to go with the model that's been optimized for the closest midpoint to where you are. So in this case, it's more than likely going to be Sydney for Canberra, for example. But you know, it doesn't hurt to have an extra opinion there by switching between those. I use the ACCESS VT a lot, Victoria, Tasmania, and so that probably will be the focus for this video, but just bear in mind that whichever location you happen to be at, there's probably a coverage for you, unless you're probably from, you know, northern WA or other areas where there's not quite the same ACCESS-C availability. You'd have to go with the ACCESS-G. And just to reiterate from the last video, the ACCESS or ACCESS-G model is a 12 kilometer resolution, and the ACCESS-C is a 1.5 kilometer resolution. So you're just going to be able to have a lot more detail and granularity in the data from those models. So what's the first thing to think about really when we are looking at which model to choose for our shoot? And really it just comes down to how far away the shoot actually is and how that data rolls up. And it's probably actually easier for me to show you a flowchart that I've prepared that sort of outlines the way I think about it. So up the top here we've got how far are we from the shoot time, and so if we are about 2 hours out, then we're looking at sources of information that are almost real time, or you're kind of looking at what's actually happening right now, and basically you can kind of infer what's going to happen based on the current conditions. And so hopefully, you know, if your location's an hour away, it doesn't change too much in the drive time that you have. So here we're talking about satellites and webcams primarily being that sort of source of truth. There's no point going necessarily with a long-range forecast like ECMWF when we have the raw data, or can physically see in the webcam if it's clear or not. And so here we're going to be using that for real-time cloud movement, any of the current conditions, and if there's any changes, so you can sort of track that. And we'll do some visualization on that. If you saw the last video, I did explain a little bit about using the satellite information for that. And we can use a secondary model here, which is now ACCESS-C, which is now available. And because ACCESS-C is a short range model, it runs out to about 36 hours. It does mean that you're going to have a lot more accuracy now using that as a sort of a backup or another source of truth for that. So this is going to be to verify cloud forecasts. You can use ACCESS-C to compare against what the satellite's currently saying, and so you can sort of understand if there's much of a difference there, and if the forecast is likely to be accurate, and then also for hourly predictions and any confirmation of trends. So that's within the immediate period, within the next 2 hours. And normally, if we're going to go out for an astro shoot, we're probably not going to drive much more than 2 hours or 3 hours maybe in order to get to those locations. So it's just a good one process to think about for an immediate check before you go out on a shoot. When it comes to the next tier, that's looking at from the 2 to 48 hours, so sort of in about 2 days. So here I've got 2 hours, 2 days, and 2 weeks as a kind of three, breaking it down into three sort of areas. And so with this one, the primary now switches around to being ACCESS-C. Obviously, satellites and webcams are just going to be not going to give us any information, or the conditions are going to change too much in that time range. So that's why we're switching over to a forecasting model now. And we use ACCESS-C because it's got a higher resolution of data. It's got much more detailed for local conditions, and it has 4 updates per day, which I believe ACCESS-G, which is the Bureau of Meteorology model that's more of the long-range, lower resolution model. That model is only updated twice per day, so having additional updates also helps. And here's the update times around about, this is for the eastern seaboard, so your Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Tassie, around that sort of time you'll see an update, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail. But that's helpful to know that there's certain times that data gets updated, so we can make sure that if we're about to go out or make a decision on what to do, we might want to wait just that little bit longer and for the new data to be refreshed so we can make a decision off the most recent information. And then we're using ECMWF now as a secondary measure, so that's a kind of a check mechanism. We can also use that for cloud-based information, which is very handy to have, and I can explain how that works. And it does have some additional parameters that ACCESS-C doesn't have, and also ACCESS-C only rolls out to 36 hours. And so in this case, ECMWF can bridge that gap between the 36 and 48 hours, just in terms of that. If you're worried about that sort of extra sort of 10-hour block there, or was it 12-hour block? And then in like the 2-week time frame, this is obviously your forward planning. What am I going to be doing on a shoot next weekend, for example? And in that case, you're going to switch to ECMWF because ACCESS-C doesn't run out to that long. And in fact, ECMWF does run out to 15 days in terms of the amount of data on windy.com. Whether at 15 days it's going to be super accurate is another thing, but the idea is you just check in as you go, get closer and closer to the date, see if that's moving much. I tend to find if the forecast doesn't change much over a week, then you'd be pretty unlucky if it changed a lot in the last few days, given that it's been quite stable to that point. And it also depends on the time of year, I find, as well. Like in spring down in Tassie, it's notorious for things just changing so rapidly, whereas in summer the weather patterns seem to be a lot more stable, and so you tend to find that there's less changes over time or less surprises that way. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen though, and I'm definitely not a meteorologist, so as I said, please take all of this is with a grain of salt. It's just my learnings and how I've approached my shoots, and you do your own research, I'll do mine. I'm just coming to you with what I think works. And yeah, so here we're using it for the main forecast data, long range predictions. There's a bit of AI built into that now too. I think they may have switched back to the non-AI version, and yeah, obviously long range. And I'm using the ACCESS-G, the global or general one, for just a verification check, and that's for Australian conditions. All right, so let's start with the 2-week time range, and for that we'll look at the ECMWF model here. So we have that selected, and let's say we're going to go to Cradle Mountain and want to know what that's going to be like in a couple of weeks' time. Let's go into find Cradle Mountain here. We'll put a pin right here at Dove Lake where you get the classic Cradle Mountain shot. And I've done that pretty quick. I'll just do that again. I clicked there once in that sort of area, and because it's here, I'll just close that. Click here. There's a pop-up that comes up. Click the sort of orangey yellow drop down, and then it'll come up with this basic forecast for us. I normally like to switch over to the Mediagram, and I will do another Mediagram video that sort of goes into explaining what a Mediagram is and how to read it in another video. But for the moment, we can just see here that we have quite a detailed time scale, and that's because I'm on my premium plan here and I've got the 1 hour forecast selected. So I will turn that off. Because we're looking at a long range, we don't need that level of detail, and so we can actually scroll across here. And as I keep going, you can see that we have a huge amount of information. It's actually going all the way out to in 15 days time, and you can see if we were going to be over there next weekend, for example, that it's not looking too bad on Saturday, and then on Sunday it's going to start to, it's a little bit cloudy with clear during the middle of the day, and yeah, a bit of rain around all over the place. I'll get into more detail on what the cloud-based numbers and other things are in the Mediagram video, but basically it's giving you a really good visual on what's happening there over that time. And ACCESS as well does go out quite a distance too, and so that's covering out to this range. And you'll actually see with the ACCESS model there is actually a little bit more time resolution available, even out that far. So if I click on the 1 hour forecast and scroll across to that weekend, you can see that there's actually quite a lot more information there than what ECMWF provides. So that's another big tick to the ACCESS model there, in providing more time granularity, I suppose, on those time ranges that are further out. ACCESS-C VT, as we talked in the last video, it has a lot of detail earlier on, but then that's going to back off when we actually get to this point here. So this ACCESS-C is actually ending here, all of that high resolution detail, and then the other bureau model here kicks in at the 36-hour mark. You can see that a bit better when I zoom out and see that's the 36 hours there, and then here we've got the time range beyond that. So we can actually also compare the forecast, which is pretty useful. This is popping up showing what's happening at Cradle Mountain, and we can look at our kind of target here, which was that weekend, and we can see that you know, comparing against all of the forecasts here, the Saturday here is looking pretty sunny on GFS as well, which is I think it's global forecasting service by that's actually got a write-up on all of them here. That's by the NOAA, I believe, in America. You can see ECMWF, and then Meteo Blue is only just going out that far. We've got the ACCESS, or both of the ACCESS models here, listed as well. Interestingly, it does show VT out to that far. However, that would just be a copy of all of the ACCESS-G information, I would have thought. It does look pretty much the same, so that's interesting that they're doing that. It's also the only place I've seen where they're actually referred to ACCESS as ACCESS-G, which is ACCESS-G3 written in here as well. But there is more information at the end of these Mediagrams if you're interested in more detail about who publishes the models and what they're all about there. So that's the comparison. So that can be useful. I find it's a bit over the top because when the more models you have, the more you're going to be able to talk yourself out of doing something. So that's why, based on that decision tree I showed earlier, I feel like that might be a safer approach. Just but it can't hurt to have more information, or maybe it can. Certainly with a brain like mine, where I talk myself out of things all the time. So that's using a metergram, but obviously you could also just zoom out a little bit here and then go to the clouds layer. This clouds layer that I use is adapted from a different color scheme, and I will do a video about custom color schemes in Windy down the track. So what we can do then is move this to also that weekend, and so you can see what's going on here on that particular weekend. Cradle Mountain is basically in here. What you could do if you wanted to is you could also save that as a location, so a little love heart would show up there. I probably do have one. You can see I've got the Cradle Mountain webcam here actually as my favorite here, and so you can actually see what the current conditions are at Cradle, and we'll get into that when we get to the 2-day section, or the 2-hour part to things. And there's also we could go to the following weekend, the weekend before Christmas. It doesn't show the cloud if it's too zoomed in, so you do have to zoom out. You can see you've got Cradle listed here, so that's what the cloud's going to be happening like at that time, sort of all over the place. With this color scheme, blue is what we're after. So just gives you a bit of a flavor for how you can do that. You can switch over to Access and between the two just to get an idea of what the cloud's going to be doing. But realistically, a week out, anything can sort of happen in that time frame. So it's much more just a general indication. Is the weather going to be really, really bad or not too bad? That's probably all you're going to get from that sort of 2-week time range in terms of a certainty, or from a decision-making perspective. If we're going to the 36-hour mark, or the 2 to 36 hours, that's when really we can start making some decisions, especially now that we've got the ACCESS-VT information. And so let's make an assumption that now it's actually tomorrow evening that we're wanting to do a shoot at Cradle Mountain. I haven't researched this, I'm just pulling this up straight away. So that's going to be on Monday night. So let's have a look now at that, and we should be able to find our favorites. Where are they here? There they are. So you can see that if we're going to do a sunset tomorrow night, and sunset's going to be around 8 to 9 p.m, that it does look like it's going to be pretty cloudy. And so we can actually click on Cradle Mountain here and bring up the meteogram, put it on the 1-hour forecast, and then look at Monday night, and we can see that there's quite a bit of cloud there in the ACCESS-C VT detail, which matches what we're seeing on the map as well, which is a bit of a shame if you're wanting to do a sunset there. And it looks very low cloud as well. If we switch to ECMWF, we actually get the cloud base numbers, and here we can see the cloud base, that line there is going to be sunset. The cloud base is between 300 and 100 meters. And we know, if we scroll right to the end here, that the elevation at this particular location is 938 meters. So if the cloud base is at around that sort of level, then it sounds pretty likely that Cradle Mountain would actually be under cloud at that time. So not only would you not have a nice sunset because of the cloud being up, and the cloud will literally be on you. You'll be in a pea soup basically. So that's not great news if that's what you're trying to do. Here the ground level 0, so it's a very, very cloudy patch there at Cradle, which you can also see actually in the meteogram up the top here, because you can see that the temperature is at 6 degrees and the dew point is also at 6 degrees, which means that all of that moisture that's in the air is actually going to be condensing out. So it's going to be very humid and very cloudy and foggy on that sunset. So that's something we can infer straight away just by looking at that and having a pretty good level of information. We can also see that the wind's going to be up there at that time too. Now, if you wanted to make sure that if you're going to make a decision now and you wanted to see when is the model actually going to be updated, you can click on this eye, and this is actually going to tell you a bit more about the data. Here we can see if we click on VT, we can see that the next update's expected in 2 hours and 25 minutes, or sorry, at 2:25 in the morning, in 1 hour and 27 minutes. I guess I am burning the midnight oil recording this, but the point there is that you might want to wait that extra an hour and a half, check the latest forecast before you make a decision. So that's a really beneficial, powerful thing to have and to know, that you know, if you're making a go, no-go decision, especially if it's a big drive, it's a 4-hour drive to go to Cradle Mountain from here. So I would really want to make sure I knew that I was doing the right thing. I would know that I have the most recent information or recent model run by clicking on that information and seeing where that comes up. And in fact, if you go back to the Mediagram as well, we'll bring that up. If you look down here, it says updated 59 minutes ago. So you know that the information for the ECMWF is quite recent. If we go to ACCESS-C VT, that says 5 hours ago. So and that plays into how it was saying in about an hour and 27 the updates coming through, because ACCESS-C updates every 6 hours, so that checks out. So basically that's a really handy thing to know if you're going to make a decision. You might as well wait that little bit of extra time to get that most recent model run. And as I mentioned, it seems to be around 7:30, 1:30, 7:30, 1:30 in terms of AM and PM. Maybe it shifts an hour in daylight savings as well, but that seems to be around that sort of timing when it's released for the ACCESS-C VT. Brilliant. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea what to do in that time range from 2 to 48 hours. We're just comparing basically ECMWF and ACCESS-C VT. You can really see in this example the level of detail between those two and how much more detail there is in the VT, and so why I'm a big fan of it. So now if we're pushing back to within the 2 hour time frame, what do we do there? Well, if we're within the 2 hours, as I mentioned, we're looking at the satellite and the webcam. So this is assuming maybe, or it's pushing it a bit, but maybe we're going to be doing a sunrise at Cradle Mountain. And so if we're going to be doing that, then we could check the webcam, although webcams aren't going to work too well for a sunrise. But you know, if you're leaving late, then you might be able to check the webcam. It's obviously going to be a lot more beneficial using a webcam for a night shoot if you're just shooting straight after dark, or a sunset, because you're going to have light for the webcam to see. I guess that could be illustrated by, if we look at the Cradle Mountain webcam now, we will be able to, let's click on that one there. This was the last picture 3 hours ago, so you can sort of see that foggy, cloudy mess that was there that wouldn't really photograph too well for a sunrise, and that was 3 hours 14. We're not going to have any more information now from Cradle Mountain because it's just going to be too dark, so the webcam's not going to help us too much, but certainly would help us if we were going to do a sunset, for example. And I'd often use, say, for the Kunanyi Mount Wellington webcam before I went up there for that kind of information. But what we can also do is look at the satellite. So if I click on the satellite here, we can see this. I've got also a custom color profile for my satellite, which matches what's called an infrared rainbow type look. So it doesn't look like a pretty satellite like the color would, but I tend to find if you're using the blue or visible satellites at night, it can be quite hard to visualize the cloud density, which is where having a really well-tuned color profile for the infrared satellite can really help. Here you can see these dark patches of dark blue, which really indicate very clear skies, and so you can see that this is really super clear here. So you can sort of infer from that over Tassie, even though there's a little bit of a blue coloration there, it's probably still going to be relatively cloudy there. And you can also get some temperature readings there, which can also help to indicate that. If you go to the visible here, it might look like that's actually quite clear there in the visible, but the infrared is saying otherwise, and so it just gives you a level of uncertainty now, whereas you may have looked at the visible here and gone, oh yeah, no, that looks pretty good, I think it will be all right. But if you're comparing that color there to what's totally clear being here, it mightn't be as good as you're hoping. You can also, because it still is within that 2-hour time frame, we can also look at ACCESS-C, because that was our other backup method for that particular time in the 0 to 2 hours. So let's switch over to the clouds, and we can see even in the clouds on ACCESS-VT, it's still showing clear on that. So so that could very well be the case that that satellite information, that satellite will change. Although let's just go back to the satellite quickly. That's what the current state is, but that's not showing what it's going to be like in 5 hours time, whereas ACCESS-VT will be showing what it's like in 5 hours time. So that's actually a big tick to maybe it being clear up in that particular area. If we're referring to Cradle Mountain, of course, that's not looking quite so good, where there's still quite a bit of cloud about it, and we saw that in the mediogram too, so we know that it's probably not going to be a brilliant sunrise there. We can also change the cloud layers, so you can see that there's not much high cloud there. Click on the medium clouds here, and you can see that there's not much medium cloud, that's why it's all blue, and then I click on that and you can see it's all red now, so you can see that it's pretty much all low clouds, and low clouds aren't our friend when it comes to sunrises and sunsets, so that's not great. We can also click on fog. There's not necessarily any fog there, it's more just low cloud, or you know, you're so high up in elevation that you're basically up in the clouds because the cloud base is so low. So that's going to be the problem basically for that particular sunrise shoot. So that's how you would use that level of information for a sort of a shoot that's within the next few hours. And I might just go back to that graph, or the decision tree, just one more time, and that just to show what that looks like, and just recap. So you within 2 hours, satellites and webcams with ACCESS-C as a backup, as we just did. Within 2 days, or 2 to 48 hours, you're looking more at ACCESS-C with ECMWF as a backup, and then with 2 weeks looking at ECMWF and then ACCESS-G as a backup. And that way you don't have to get confused with all these other models like ICON and GFS. They're more, you know, global models that aren't necessarily as well tuned for Australian conditions, and so I feel like that's a pretty good way of going. So hopefully that helps you in that. As I mentioned, I'm not a meteorologist. I just really am passionate about planning my shoots, and feel like having a sort of process like this can be really, really useful in order to plan your shoots and get the most out of them. So anyway, thanks so much for joining me for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya.